To start off, can you do an introduction?
Sure. My name's Jean Blackburn. I am a visual artist. I'm a sculptor and a painter. I've been teaching at the Rhode Island School of Design for many, many years. And the work that I do circles around the domestic as a theme. I think the domestic is a really interesting area where everybody gets their start. And so we all grow up and we're influenced by our parents and our surroundings and the space that we grow up in. And so it's really loaded with all kinds of interesting information. So I tend to work with imagery and objects that have lots of meaning embedded in them as they exist. And then I manipulate them in a variety of ways, either as sculptures or as paintings, to enrich and to make more complex some of those associations. But I teach in the illustration department at RISD. I teach drawing and painting. I teach a world building class, and I teach scientific illustration. I've had a long-standing interest in archaeology, and that's influenced my own work and the way that I understand how we build culture. So I've had a lot of interesting things come together, both in my work and in my career. So,
what is one example of how you used art to convey a certain emotion?
I'm not sure that emotions are
or like an expression
exactly
or a feeling or a mood.
An expression or a feeling or an expression. I guess. Oh, so I can. So I have a daughter, and she's 27, and I think any parent will tell you when you have a child, it's really a big deal in your life. So I made a piece of sculpture from a chair. I had a rocking chair, which is actually a rocking chair that I sat in when I was pregnant. And my dad read to me in the chair when I was growing up. So it was a chair that meant something to me. And I cut the chair up, cut sections out of the chair, so you could still see that it was a rocking chair, but I used those pieces to make a model of the rocking chair, but it was a small version. It was a half size of the original rocking chair. So it was a reference both to my history and to my daughter. And so in that way, I was able to transform a really common object and give it a much more complex reading.
Can you
So I
talk
think that
about
would be a good example.
Can you talk about some artists that influence you?
Boy, there's a lot of them. I've looked at a lot of different people, everything from Renaissance artists, contemporary sculptors. I was really influenced by an opportunity that I had to go into a cave in France. I went into a cave called Peshmeral, where you can actually see the ancient cave paintings, and that was extraordinary because it wasn't a facsimile. There's a very famous cave called Lascaux that has in France that has ancient. It's a facsimile of the actual, the original cave. This is the actual cave itself. I guess what was so striking to me about that was just the primacy of the urgency of the expression. These marks that people made in a space unlike anything else. It was almost like being inside of someone's body. They were in this space with torches or candlelight and making imagery of animals and handprints. It was extraordinary, really powerful. I don't know exactly how that's influenced me, except I know it influenced me deeply.
Compared to like middle-aged classical paintings, I see modern art correlate more with those like very ancient cave paintings you were talking about. So I was wondering if you think modern art is a process of evolution or de-evolution of art.
Well, that's an interesting. I think it does both at the same time. I think it's always changing, and I think the culture defines what it needs, and that's really what survives as art. Interesting ideas come up in art that's made at any time, and the art that's most interesting to the culture is the art that survives, really. Some art is rediscovered, but in that process of things being discovered or left behind, it's evolving and devolving at the same time. So I think it's a very active, rich process. In the same way that evolution happens. In evolution, we lose. Some species survive, other species don't really work out. They don't fit their ecological niche very well, and they disappear. Or they're just too wacky and strange. I'm sorry, my cat's tail kept getting into the image. But yeah, no, so I think it's an interesting idea of it in flux all the time, changing, mutating.
When you're talking about modern art is interesting, do you think seeing something that's good today is trained, or do you like something inherently?
So that's a complicated question, in that it might take a while to answer that. I think art training teaches us certain things that are supposedly good. And so we learn, oh, this is good, this is bad, or this is not as good. But a lot of that is aesthetic training. Not all of it, but a lot of it is. And it may change through time. If you look at paintings from the 1920s, the 1940s, they all have certain stylistic aspects to them that might look old-fashioned now or outdated or not that interesting or something, but they're influenced by their time, and they're influenced by whatever school they happen to come out of. But I think there's another aspect that really influences the way we understand art, and that is, well, the fact that we're human and that we're embodied, that we exist in physical bodies, and there are certain things about being in those physical bodies that teach us about the world or that influence our experience. And we all have a sense of things being lighter sort of up, things being heavier down, because we know gravity, right? We have left hand and right hand. There are certain ways we understand those. It's very interesting if you think about the relationship of culture to the way we understand things visually or perceptually. In the West, we read from left to right, from top to bottom. In Asia, you can read that way, but you can also read from right to left. And so compositionally, we might see something and understand something differently because one culture sees it flipped or reads it one way, another culture might read it a different way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I always ask my students to look at things in a mirror because I think it teaches them to think about what happens if we flip it.
How do you think the conceptual trend in contemporary art is shaped?
How is it shaped?
Or who is shaping it? What factors is shaping it?
The conceptual part, I think...
Like the different conceptual trends, what do you think is shaping it?
Well, I think that the conceptual part itself, I think, is coming from philosophy, cultural theorists, needs of the culture. But I think the art market is driven by some other really different factors. I think the art world has become in many ways very influenced by market economics and issues of scarcity and issues of other things like that. So it's a complex interplay of things that way. So that's a hard question to answer.
How do you define a good piece of art between concepts and aesthetics?
I'm sorry, say that again?
I'm sorry. How do you define a good piece of art between the concepts and the visual features?
Between the concepts and the visual...
How do you find a balance between the two? Which side weighs more?
I think that can really depend as to what you want the piece to do. Personally, I like work that has a strong conceptual side because I really like for something to engage me intellectually and make me think about how I understand things. Certainly things can be pleasing to look at and be aesthetically really wonderful. Matisse is an artist who chose to make work that was really beautiful. And he realized that after World War I and then, after World War II, there was so much violence and horror in the world that making beautiful work was enough. A lot of artists at the time thought his work was beautiful. Like, that's not enough. We have to deal with this more serious stuff, like the world has been at war. So he's an interesting artist. If we're looking at the issue of concept and aesthetics, he's an interesting artist to look at for that.
I was just arguing with Stellan the other day at the RISD Museum about a Matisse painting, and he just thinks that Matisse paintings are ugly and horrendous. Can you explain why you think it's good? Because he doesn't believe me.
Matisse recognized that a lot of people would think his paintings were really too simple and almost like a child drew them, right? He's like, but Matisse was a lawyer before he was a painter. And so he was a good writer and a good thinker. He could make a good argument. And so he wrote this essay about his paintings. And he said, well, people will mistake these things as being childlike and simplistic, but I practice them and I limber up and I intend them to be a certain way. They're much more intentional than they appear. And so his work was, when I was in graduate school, I did a copy of one of his paintings. And every time I brought it in, I did it and I brought it in to show my teacher. And he goes, that's not a good copy. And that we did this 10 times. And finally he said, but after I had done it about 5 times, I started to realize that there was more in play there. And even though it looked so simple to capture what he was doing, it wasn't just a simple thing to copy. So I came to recognize and respect Matisse a lot more than I thought. So it's kind of funny.
That's what I told you.
I don't know if I answered your question very much, but...
Yes, it definitely did answer his. Talking about art education, since you are a professor, do you think the standards of a good piece of art in art school will apply for a student in real life?
I actually think that a lot of the things you learn as a student are things that you push off against as a professional. I think that's part of what helps to keep it rolling and changing. If you just...
So what's the point of art school then?
I think it's really important to understand the traditions and dialogue around the work, and to understand what's gone before and what kinds of things people are thinking about and how they make ideas, how they convey ideas through artwork. I think hopefully in our art school you learn that. You may not like a lot of the work. In fact, if you don't like a lot of the work, it may to give you fuel to make your own work when you leave. There are different traditions about dealing with masters in the past. Some traditions are that you forge your own path from that. Other traditions are that you practice and you get really good at doing those things and you become a master yourself. I don't know. I would never say one is right and one is wrong. They're different. People have different paces and they suit different people in different ways. But I do think, for me, I guess I find making artwork a contemplative way of living. And I really enjoy that. And it allows me to think about things and explore things. And things surprise me with my work. And that's a great pleasure. Plus, I think it's also important to be able to feel like your work is speaking to other people and that you're communicating something about your experience and your life and the things that are important.
Do you think a good artist originates from a sudden epiphany or from taking inspirations and classes from other masters?
Excuse me. I think it can happen either way, except that I think good artwork comes from sort of a meditation on your experience and your life in certain ways. You can study with masters and learn many, many things and become good at things, but you also have to bring some of yourself. And I think that comes from having experience and having lived through some things. I think it's from what I've seen, most people who make interesting work have had difficulties in their life or have had challenges or have had things they've had to navigate, and they have something to speak about.
Do you think, as someone who has not experienced that kind of trauma, to just simply take the techniques of artists who have, for example, if I copy Francis Bacon, if I take their techniques in my art, do you think the horror is going to show, or is it not going to portray the effect that you want it to portray?
Well, let's see, that's hard. It's hard. I wouldn't want to make generalities about that because I think people arrive at things in different ways. I guess I'm speaking from my own experience in that I had to go through some difficult things before I recognized that I could do a lot of stuff. I could draw and do a lot of things. People would say, oh, that's a really nice drawing. But it didn't have much depth to it, I don't think, when I was young. And I think I had to live through some things that helped to give it depth. Now, I didn't, can you rephrase your question if I didn't answer it completely? Would you mind?
So for example, if I am a very naive kid and then I want to portray the fact that I've experienced all these trauma and depth of thinking, if I just copy from Francis Bacon and take his techniques of distortion into my paintings, do you think I will be able to show that I actually experienced trauma, or do you think that people can tell that this is I haven't experienced what I'm hoping to portray?
You can probably do a good job of faking it. But I don't know how that's going to make you feel. I think it's more than you don't want to put up a facade and have the work be a facade. You
But
want it
putting
to, I
up a
mean,
facade can be a good piece of modern art, right?
it could be. That might be part of your something. Maybe you've experienced a lot of facades, or you want to speak about the falseness of things or the hollowness of things. That would be a good way to do that. And that might be very legitimate.
Do you think the facade
So
in modern art is good or bad?
I think some is good and some is not. You're not going to get me to pin down any general statement like that. No, there's always good work and bad work anytime. It's astonishing when we have all these old masters we see in museums, right? They are just the tip of the iceberg of artists that were working at their time. The culture time winnows down. So many artists disappear. We never know about them. So now there are hundreds of thousands of artists. Who knows how many will survive 100 years, 1,000 years, even less. So it's extraordinary. But as I say, for me, it's the importance is sort of living a contemplative life. I oftentimes think being an artist is absurd in many ways, but is it any less absurd than being an accountant? I don't know. I think that's even more absurd. Calligraphy and the relationship, the way the brushstroke is seen. Now, I'm seeing it from a non-Chinese point of view, but the relationship of language and image that are tied together in China, in Chinese calligraphy and Chinese pictographs and Chinese painting is quite interesting.
Yes.
From
yes.
my perspective.
I
don't know if
agree.
it's interesting from your perspective.
Calligraphy is one art form as itself. Selen is actually
Yeah.
very talented at calligraphy himself, so.
Nice.
So I'm quite curious. So how would you evaluate how much you like a Chinese painting? Because in Chinese painting, there isn't that much perspective and realistic pursuit. And so how do you define a good Chinese painting? Is it only like your personal preference, or is there a standard or a
No, that's a really good question. And since I haven't been trained in the aesthetics of Chinese painting, I look at it purely in terms of, I guess, variation of mark and association, like visual, like kind of visual journey it sets up for my eye. I guess I'm thinking mostly of landscape painting. And so I've studied a little bit about natural structures, and I know that like the movement of water, or I've studied some geology and know a little bit about the formation of rocks. And so sometimes I'll see some of that knowledge seems to be reflected in some of the paintings. And so that interests me because it seems to be talking not just about the way the thing looks, but the way it was formed or how it moves or its nature,
In terms of when you mentioned like calligraphy's relationship with these type of works, so what were you talking about exactly? Can you explain more?
So when my daughter was little, we tried to have her learn Chinese. So, and she had to learn, she was learning speaking of Chinese, but also writing calligraphy at the same time. And I remember that there was a very specific way she had to make each stroke and each word, and it had to be done in a certain order, certain way. So I can understand the frustration of it being very limited feeling, but well, I guess to make this a little bit more complex even, I know that the Chinese dictionary is organized by the number of strokes in the characters, right? Am I correct about that? And that the number of one stroke, well, not one stroke, but a few strokes are more complex, and that's also, so I guess I'm really interested in the way mark making, calligraphy, meaning, and pictures are all like organized in and related in Chinese culture. There's not a parallel in the West. We don't have anything quite like that. And so I think it influences the way people understand things differently, culturally, very differently, Anyway, because I don't speak Chinese and I don't write Chinese, I'm seeing it from a distance, and I can only speak as someone growing up in the Western tradition.
I actually think like different perspective actually brings more to my understanding of Chinese calligraphy.
Yes.
Like when an outsider see it, it kind of has a kind of objectiveness that you don't have after you're living through them.
Sure. But I can totally understand how copying a master's painting over and over and over again in the tradition of the Chinese, student could be really frustrating.
Yeah, there's like standards for a good calligraphy. It's like everybody's trying to learn from that, and there isn't that much room. There is like pretty authentic and like traditional and canon thing that everybody tries to copy.
Right. Right. But from what I can see of my, a lot of my Chinese students, you guys have learned a lot. There's a lot of rigor that you have, and a lot of ability to, I'm not being very articulate, but your materials in a very focused way. And I think a lot of Western students aren't as familiar with certain things and don't have as much of the rigor that way.
Yes.
So anyway, I love that you're both as passionate as you are about this.
Thank you.
And
I
applaud your enthusiasm. So
thank you for your time
anyway,
today.
Absolutely. Good luck with your stuff, and I hope you'll keep in touch.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yep.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
day. Bye. 我去，卡点儿啊，还有3分钟。
你啥呀？有事啊？